side of the main A Song of Ice and Fire book series. The Dance of the Dragons is arguably the most well documented and impactful war in the history of Westeros, at least after the Targaryen conquest. It was fundamentally a before and after event that damaged House Targaryen beyond repair and set them on a path that would end in their downfall. Much of what we know of it comes from Fire and Blood, with the dance and its build-up taking up a huge chunk of an already long book. Like any war, it is not a single event, but a collection of smaller ones over several years, with some of these battles overshadowing the others. That's why in this video, we're going to be discussing and talking about the history and lore behind every battle in the Dance of the Dragons. Before we start, we need to define what we are calling a battle, because that in itself determines where this video should start in the timeline. Different fans argue for different events, but there are three common suggestions: Daemon's assault and the bloodless capture of Harrenhal, the dance over Shipbreaker Bay in which Aemon One-Eye kills Lucerys Velaryon, and some even say the Battle of the Burning Mill. I've seen some even make an argument that the fight between Aemond, Jace, Luke and Joffrey on Driftmark a decade prior in 220 AC, after Aemon claimed Vhagar, as a start point. While this event does deepen the resentment between the Blacks and the Greens, I would be hard pressed to call it an act of war. Given how close in time Harrenhal and Shipbreaker Bay happen, it does make sense to start around here and move forward. Some would argue the dance above Shipbreaker Bay doesn't actually count as a battle, given it was a one-on-one fight. However, if we are calling the battle above the God's Eye later into the war a battle, then Shipbreaker Bay should also be considered such. We have friends in the Riverlands, though not all of them dare show their colours yet. We need a place where they can gather, a tollhold, on the mainland large enough to house a sizable host, and strong enough to hold against whatever forces the usurper can send against us. Here, Harrenhal, Prince Daemon Targaryen to the Black Council, Fire and Blood, the Dying of the Dragons, the Blacks and the Greens. The competing claims of Rhaenyra Targaryen and King Aegon II Targaryen plunged the Seven Kingdoms into civil war, but the build-up to real battle was a slow process, starting with a few tactical captures of key locations. This was more so important for the Blacks. Though Rhaenyra's faction possessed more dragons, their strength was largely centred on Dragonstone rather than the mainland, and they needed a foothold to build from. That foothold would be Harrenhal. In the Riverlands, House Tully remained effectively neutral, divided between Lord Grover Tully and his grandson, Sir Elmo. Rhaenyra's husband, Prince Daemon Targaryen, proposed Harrenhal as a rallying point for their cause, despite the castle being held by Larys Strong, a supporter of King Aegon II and his Master of Whispers. While a burned, accursed ruin, Harrenhal was still a hard castle to attack with an army, and it commanded a strong position near the border with the Crownlands on the banks of the God's Eye. As Jacaerys and Lucerys Velaryon departed Dragonstone to gather allies, and Corlys Velaryon sealed off Blackwater Bay, Rhaenyra entrusted Daemon with command of that campaign. With her leave, he set out to take Harrenhal and secure the Riverlands for the Blacks. As Larys Strong, the Clubfoot, served King Aegon II in King's Landing as Master of Whispers, Harrenhal was left in the care of his great-uncle, the aged Simon Strong. When Daemon arrived, he did not come by road, but from the sky, descending upon his dragon Caraxes and alighting atop the Kingspire Tower, the very place where Harren the Black had perished centuries prior during Aegon's conquest. The memory of that ancient doom weighed heavily. Harrenhal had once been consumed by Dragonflame when Aegon the Conqueror and Balerion the Black Dread destroyed House Hoare, and Sir Simon had no wish to see such ruin visited upon it again. Faced with Daemon and his dragon, he chose submission over defiance, lowering his banner and yielding the vast, half-ruined castle without a fight. Sir Simon and his grandsons were taken as hostages, among others, while the Blacks seized the wealth and resources of House Strong to support their cause. Around the same time as Daemon's assault on Harrenhal, Lucerys Velaryon flew to Storm's End as an envoy for his mother, proposing an alliance between House Baratheon and the Black faction. Rhaenyra assumed that this would be a safe trip for her son, given that Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, a key member of the Blacks, was herself half Baratheon on her mother's side. She was wrong to make that assumption. Lucerys arrived on a grim day as a great storm gathered overhead. At Storm's End, he found Prince Aemon One-Eye already in residence, with his mighty dragon Vhagar. The animosity between Aemon and Lucerys dated back to at least 120 AC, and the incident on Driftmark in the aftermath of Aemon claiming Vhagar, in which Lucerys had taken Aemon's eye. Aemon sought to provoke his cousin, hurling insults and naming him a strong bastard. But Lucerys, bound by an oath to his mother not to fight, refused to rise to Aemon's bait. He delivered his message to Lord Boros Baratheon, yet the Lord denied Rhaenyra's cause with contempt, with Aemon betrothed to one of his many daughters. He commanded the boy to depart at once. Though Boros forbade violence within his hall, he did not prevent Aemon from pursuing his cousin once he had left. Mounting Vhagar, Aemon took to the sky and gave chase in the heart of the storm amidst the thunder and lightning. Dragon met dragon, but the struggle was very brief. Vast and ancient, Vhagar dwarfed Lucerys' younger Arrax, and the younger dragon was torn apart in the sky. Days later, the shattered remains told the tale. Arrax's head was washed ashore, along with the body, or what was left of it, of Lucerys Velaryon. Some call this incident above the waters of Shipbreaker Bay the true start of the Dance of the Dragons. First blood had been spilled, and no side could now back down. Any chance of peace died with Lucerys Velaryon. The blood and cheese incident that followed, the son for a son murder of Prince Jaehaerys, heir to King Aegon in front of his mother, was ordered by Prince Daemon as a direct result of Lucerys' death, an event that in itself would firm the resolve of the Greens, ensuring the only way this war would end would be with fire and blood. After the deaths of both princes, there were calls for vengeance from supporters of both the Blacks and the Greens. The ever-fractious Riverlords would prove a prime location for these tit-for-tat attacks to occur. At the start of the war, Grover Tully, Lord Paramount of the Trident, wanted to support King Aegon II and the Greens, but he was too old and bedridden to act. His grandson and heir, Sir Elmo Tully, who preferred the claim of Rhaenyra and the Blacks, kept the Tully banners at Riverrun instead. When war did break out, House Blackwood declared for Rhaenyra, while the ancient rivals of House Bracken sided with King Aegon. Lord Samwell Blackwood answered swiftly, sending raiders into Bracken lands. In response, Sir Amos Bracken marched to meet him, bringing the fight into Blackwood territory. The two forces met near a riverside mill, likely somewhere along the Red Fork of the Trident, where the Blackwoods caught the Brackens unaware as they made camp. Battle was joined in a sudden fury. Amidst the chaos, Sir Amos slew Lord Samwell in a single combat, striking down his foe before the eyes of both hosts. Yet this triumph was very short-lived, for Amos himself was brought down soon after, felled by a wayward arrow said to have been loosed by Samwell's sister, Alysanne Blackwood, known as Black Ally. As the fighting raged, the mill was set ablaze, its flames rising over the field. In the end, with both leaders dead and their forces bloodied, Sir Rhaelon Rivers gathered what remained of the Bracken men and led them on a tactical retreat back to their seat of Stonehenge. The remnants of the Bracken host did make it back to Stonehenge, only to find their castle already lost. In their absence, Daemon Targaryen had descended upon it on Caraxes, leading a host of Riverlords made up of Darrys, Freys, Pipers and Roots. With the Bracken strength divided, and most of their men away with Amos, the Blacks met little resistance and swiftly took Stonehenge. Lord Humphrey Bracken was captured, along with his remaining children, his third wife, and even his low-born paramour. When Sir Rhaelon Rivers arrived and beheld the fall of Stonehenge, he had no choice. Outmatched and outmanoeuvred, he bent the knee to Daemon, bringing what remained of the Green resistance in the Riverlands to an end. Not even the Kingsguard remained untouched by the Dance of the Dragons, and were divided between Rhaenyra and Aegon. Sir Laurent Marband and Sir Eric Cargyll were already at Dragonstone in the service of Rhaenyra, and was later joined by Sir Steffon Darkland. the 3 forming the very heart of her new Queen's Guard. The remaining 4 of the 7, Sir Criston Cole, Sir Aric Cargyll, Sir Rickard Thorne and Sir Willis Fell, declared for Aegon II in King's Landing. The division of the Cargyll twins became the subject of song, most famously in Farewell, My Brother, composed by Lucian of Tarth, which tells of their final parting. Burning for vengeance after the death of his son, Prince Jaehaerys, brutally murdered by blood and cheese on the orders of Prince Daemon, King Aegon II wished to fly at once to Dragonstone on Sunfire to destroy his half-sister and her sons. The Green Council restrained him, and Sir Criston Cole, the new Hand of the King and Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, put forth an alternative plan: stealth and deceit. He sent Sir Aric to Dragonstone, bidding him to pose as his twin brother Sir Eric and infiltrate the castle. His true purpose remains uncertain, as accounts differ. Some claim he was sent to kill Rhaenyra herself, others that her sons were the intended targets. What followed has passed into legend. Before any plot could be carried out, the twins encountered one another within the halls of the castle. Brother met brother in steel. Songs claim they declared their love, even as they fought, their blades ringing for nearly an hour before they died in each other's arms. Yet other accounts tell a colder tale, that they named one another traitor and came together in fury, their duel brief and savage, ending with both mortally wounded upon the floor. The deaths were a huge loss for both Rhaenyra and Aegon, losing loyal members of their personal guard. Princess Rhaenys made no attempt to flee. With a glad cry and a crack of her whip, she turned melees towards the foe. The writings above Archmaester Gyldayn on the Battle of Rook's Rest, Fire and Blood, the dying of the dragons, the red dragon and the gold. In the wake of Harrenhal's fall, the Battle of the Burning Mill, and the loss of Stonehenge, King Aegon II removed his grandfather, Sir Otto Hightower, as the Hand of the King, and raised Sir Criston Cole, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, in his place. Cole urged swift action against those he named traitors, those who declared for Rhaenyra. With the Velaryons and Celtigards beyond reach across the waters of Blackwater Bay, Sir Criston turned his attention to the Black supporters on the mainland, where the Greens had most of their strength. Given they were isolated from Rhaenyra and her many dragons, they stood exposed and without protection. The royal host, led by Cole, first came to Rosby and Stokeworth, whose lords had already been taken captive in King's Landing during their initial coup. Faced with death, they had bent the knee to Aegon, and their castles opened without resistance. Their men were added to the king's strength, and his army passed through unopposed. Aegon and Criston had set out from King's Landing with a force of 100 knights, 500 men-at-arms, and 3 times as many sellswords, some 2,400 in all. With the additions drawn from Rosby and Stokeworth, the numbers had grown further by the time they marched on towards Duskendale. The exact number of men is not wholly clear, but it is very likely to have surpassed 3,000 men, given the size of House Rosby and Stokeworth and the lands they command. The main target of this first stage of the Green Offensive was the large walled port town of Duskendale, given that House Darkland had sworn themselves to Rhaenyra and the Blacks. While Duskendale was a walled port town, it was caught completely by surprise and unprepared. It quickly fell to Aegon's forces and was sacked, while the ships of the harbour were set afire. Lord Gunther Darkland was beheaded for treason. Most of his household knights submitted to Aegon, although a few decided to follow their lord in death. The levies of House Darkland were added to Cole and Aegon's growing army, with again the exact number not clear. Rook's Rest would be Cole and Aegon's next target. By this stage, the Greens had lost the element of surprise, and Lord Staunton had been forewarned of their approach. He closed the gates of the castle, but was unable to prevent Criston from burning his fields or killing his small folk and livestock. When supplies in Rook's Rest began to run out, Lord Staunton asked for assistance from Rhaenyra, sending a raven to Dragonstone. Rhaenyra's sons, Jaehaerys and Joffrey Velaryon, longed to join the war, eager to take to the skies on their dragons, Vermax and Tyrax, and take revenge for the death of their brother Lucerys. Rhaenyra rightly forbade it, unwilling to risk them. Instead, 9 days after Lord Staunton's plea for aid, Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, flew alone to Rook's Rest, upon her dragon Meleys, the Red Queen. Criston Cole had anticipated such a move, and was all part of the Greens' larger battle plan. As Meleys descended upon Cole's besieging army, his archers and scorpions loosed their bolts. Unsurprisingly, the dragon was little troubled by them, but little did Rhaenys know this was all part of Aegon and Cole's bait. In answer, Rhaenys swept over the field in flames, burning Cole's men where they stood. The Greens took huge losses in this initial bout of dragon flame, but it was all too late for the Queen who never was, and her Red Queen. The trap was sprung. King Aegon II and his brother, Prince Aemond, rose into the sky on their dragons, Sunfire and Vhagar. The three dragons met high above the battlefield, their clash unfolding 1,000 feet in the air. Meleys struck first, seizing Sunfire by the neck, but in that instant, Vhagar, the much larger dragon, one of Aegon the Conqueror's original three, descended upon them from above. Locked together, the dragons tumbled from the sky and crashed to the earth below. Vhagar rose again, the tough veteran of countless battles. She was largely unhurt, but the others fared far worse. Meleys was shattered by the fall, torn apart upon the ground, and Rhaenys was found dead beside her. Sunfire survived, though grievously wounded, with one wing half destroyed. King Aegon himself had suffered terrible burns and broken bones, many believing him to be dead at first. With the Black defenders broken, Aemond and Criston took Rook's Rest. Lord Staunton and his 100 defenders were put to the sword, and the castle fell to the Greens. But the cost was high. The heads of Lord Staunton and the dragon Meleys were taken back to King's Landing, where they were later paraded through the streets upon a cart. The sight of the great dragon's severed head filled the small folk with awe and dread. Fear spread rapidly, and thousands fled the city until the Dowager Queen Alicent Hightower ordered the gates be shut and barred to halt the exodus. Sir Criston Cole lost 800 men to Meleys' flames, while King Aegon II was left broken and burned, unable to rule for a year. In his stead, Prince Aemond assumed the regency. Sunfire too was too badly wounded to fly, and too large to be moved, so was left behind at Rook's Rest, where he fed on carrion and livestock as he slowly healed. For the Blacks, the loss was devastating. Rhaenys Targaryen and her dragon had been among their greatest assets. Rhaenys' husband, Lord Corlys Velaryon, was overcome with grief and anger, laying the blame upon Rhaenyra, insisting that had she or her sons ridden to battle, his wife might have survived. Though Rook's Rest would later be retaken for the Blacks under Lord Wallace Mouton, the victory proved hollow. Mouton himself was slain in a failed attempt to kill the wounded Sunfire, and the scars of the battle lingered long after the fighting had passed. Be victory, I pray I never win another. Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake, on the Battle of the Gullet, Fire and Blood, the Dying of the Dragons, the Red Dragon and the Gold. After the death of Rhaenys and the need to find more dragon riders, several unclaimed dragons were claimed by so-called dragon seeds, men and women of Targaryen descent, in most cases bastards or children of bastards, mostly located from Dragonstone. This was a bold move by Rhaenyra, but gave her a huge advantage over the Greens in terms of dragon numbers. The first test of these dragon seeds would be the Battle of the Gullet. At the onset of the war, House Velaryon secured Blackwater Bay, their fleet sealing off the Gullet and denying passage to their enemies. In response to the Blacks' early success, most notably Prince Daemon's seizure of Harrenhal, Otto Hightower, the then Hand of the King, devised a plan to break that blockade. He'd reached across the narrow sea to the Triarchy, long-standing foes of Daemon, seeking to turn them against Lord Corlys Velaryon. Though the scheme required time and cost Otto his position as Hand of the King when King Aegon lost his patience and replaced him with Sir Criston Cole, his efforts would not be in vain. In Tyrosh, the High Council of the Triarchy had accepted Otto's offer. A fleet of 90 warships under Admiral Shakaro Lothar of Lys set sail from the Stepstones beneath the banner of the Three Daughters, steering for the Gullet. On Dragonstone, Prince Jacaerys resolved to send his younger half-brother, Prince Aegon and Viserys to safety in Pentos until their mother had secured the throne. They departed late in the year 129 AC aboard the Pentoshi cog called the Gay Abandon, escorted by 7 Velaryon warships. Fate intervened before they could reach safety. The Triarchy's fleet swept into the Gullet and fell upon them. The escorting ships were sunk or taken, the Gay Abandon herself captured. Prince Viserys, possessing only a dragon egg, was unable to escape and fell into captivity. His brother, Aegon the Younger, fled upon his young dragon Stormcloud. Though pursued and grievously wounded by arrows and scorpion bolts, the dragon carried him back to Dragonstone. There Aegon delivered word of the enemy fleet before Stormcloud succumbed to his wounds and died. The battle was joined on the 5th day of the new year, 130 AC. Admiral Shakaro Lothar divided the Triarchy fleet into 2 squadrons, one passing north of Dragonstone and the other to the south. At sunrise they struck, catching the Velaryon ships unprepared and scattering the blockade that had held the Gullet. Prince Jacaerys took to the sky upon Vermax to meet the assault. He descended upon a line of Lyseni galleys, setting fire to one vessel, then another. The sailors, veterans of the Stepstones and familiar with Prince Daemon and Caraxes, answered with disciplined volleys of spears and arrows. Soon he was joined in the air by Ulf White on Silverwing, Nettles on Sheepstealer, Adam Velaryon on Seasmoke, and Hugh Hammer on Vermithor, the new and untested Dragon Seeds. Together they broke the enemy line, forcing galley after galley to turn away in retreat. Yet Vermax flew too low in the chaos of the battle, struck, whether by a crossbow bolt to the eye or dragged down by a grapple, accounts differ. He crashed into the sea. Survivors spoke of the dragon struggling amidst burning rigging for sinking beneath the waves. Jacaerys Velaryon escaped the wreck of his dragon, only to be cut down by Myrrah's crossbowmen moments later. Elsewhere, the fighting raged on into the night. The Southern Triarchy squadron bypassed Dragonstone, judging it far too strong to attack, and instead fell upon the undefended Driftmark. Spicetown was put to the torch by fireships, its harbour consumed in flame, the town sacked, its people slaughtered and left unburied. High Tide, along with the treasures of Lord Corlys Velaryon, was destroyed, and the Sea Snake's household was scattered and slain as they fled. In truth, Driftmark and House Velaryon would never recover from the damage done that day. The battle left devastation on a scale few had imagined possible. Thousands perished, and Spicetown was so thoroughly destroyed that it was never rebuilt. The Velaryon fleet suffered a loss of nearly a third of its strength, while Prince Jacaerys Velaryon and his dragon Vermax were dead. Prince Viserys Targaryen was taken captive, and later presumed dead by both sides. Prince Aegon the Younger would never forgive himself for failing to protect his younger brother. Accounts differ on what exactly followed. Mushroom claimed that Hugh Hammer and Ulf White celebrated their roles in the victory, while Nettles and Adam Velaryon were deeply shaken by the aftermath. Adam is said to have sought out Lord Corlys Velaryon, though what passed between them remains unknown. Grief quickly turned to resentment, with many blaming Rhaenyra for the losses endured. In the end, the battle proved both victory and failure, depending on perspective. Tactically, it favoured the Greens. They'd inflicted enormous damage and killed Rhaenyra's heir. Strategically, however, it was a failure, as they did not break the Velaryon grip on Blackwater Bay. Their allies in the Free Cities were so badly weakened they could play no further part in the war. My lord is kind to say so, but the victory belonged to Tessarion, Daeron Targaryen, responding to Aemond Hightower's praise after the Battle of the Honeywine, Fire and Blood, the dying of the dragons, the Red Dragon and the Gold. Shortly after the Battle of the Gullet, in the 3rd week of 130 AC in the Reach, Aemond Hightower and his army on the march to King's Landing found itself trapped against the banks of the Honeywine River, caught between the converging Reach Lords, whom were supporting Rhaenyra Targaryen, and the Blacks. From the northeast came Lord Thaddeus Rowan and Tom Flowers, the bastard of Bitterbridge, bringing a strong force of mounted knights. From the opposite side, Sir Alan Beesbury, Lord Alan Tarley, and Lord Owen Costain. They combined their smaller contingents and struck from the rear, cutting off all routes of escape towards Old Town. Surrounded and pressed on both sides, the Hightower line began to break. What had seemed certain defeat shifted suddenly when a vast shadow fell over the battlefield. Prince Daeron Targaryen, the youngest son of King Viserys and Alicent Hightower, whom had been fostered at Old Town, arrived overhead upon Tessarion, and his presence turned the tide. The Black assault faltered, and a full rout followed, with heavy losses inflicted in the retreat. Tom Flowers was slain in the fighting, while Lord Owen Costain was mortally wounded by John Roxton, wielding the famed Valyrian steel blade Orphan Maker. Sir Alan Tarley and Sir Alan Beesbury were taken prisoner. Only Lord Thaddeus Rowan managed to escape the disaster, withdrawing northward with what remained of his army. The battle proved a severe setback for the Blacks, bringing their campaign in the Reach to a halt, allowing almost a clear march to King's Landing for Ormond Hightower's army. The Black armies were shattered, and most of their principal commanders in the region were either slain or taken captive. Only Thaddeus Rowan, coming barely a fortnight after the catastrophic defeat at the Gullet. The losses prompted Lord Bar Emmon to argue the moment had arrived to seek terms and end the war. Instead, the string of disasters drove Queen Rhaenyra towards a far more dangerous course, a direct strike on King's Landing itself, taking advantage of Daemon's strategy that had already drawn Aemond and much of the city's strength into the Riverlands. Daeron Targaryen emerged from the battle as the great hero, knighted by Lord Ormond with the Valyrian steel sword Vigilance. He was first hailed as Daeron the Daring. Though celebrated across the green ranks, Daeron himself downplayed the acclaim, instead insisting that Tessarion had been the true victor of the day. As the North gathered its strength on behalf of Rhaenyra, Prince Aemon remained convinced that the true threat lay with Daemon and his army at Harrenhal. Acting on that belief, he and Cole led a force of 4,000 men out of King's Landing, with Vhagar overhead, and marched into the Riverlands in pursuit. Yet Daemon had already anticipated their movement. Even before Aemon left the capital, word of their intentions had reached him. He broke camp and rode south upon Caraxes, deliberately avoiding Criston Cole's line of march and refusing battle on their terms. After a march of 19 days, Aemon and Criston reached Harrenhal, only to find it abandoned and empty. The castle had been left silent and deserted. Convinced at first they had outmaneuvered their foe, they took the empty stronghold as a sign of success, unaware that Daemon had already slipped beyond their grasp. An army of Greens from the Westerlands, under the command of Lord Jason Lannister, was about to enter the Riverlands, crossing the Red Fork. But they were met by an army of Riverlords, loyal to Rhaenyra, men of House Piper and Vance. The Westermen met the outnumbered Rivermen, but the Rivermen threw back 3 attempts of crossing the river, with Lord Jason being slain in the 3rd attack by a squire known as Pate of Longleaf. Command of the Lannister host was assumed by Adrian Tarback. Adrian and 100 knights cast off their heavy armour and slipped into the waters of the Red Fork, swimming upstream away from the main fighting, emerging beyond the lines. They fell upon Lord Tristan Vance's force from behind, catching them unprepared. The sudden attack shattered the Riverlord's position. In the chaos, Adrian struck down Vance, breaking the backbone of the resistance. With their commanders slain and their rear overrun, the remaining Rivermen collapsed, allowing the Westermen to push through the Red Fork. Lord Peter Piper later knighted Pate of Longleaf, who came to be known thereafter as Longleaf the Lion Slayer. The Lannister host pressed eastward towards Harrenhal, continuing its advance under Adrian's leadership and securing a series of hard-won victories. The momentum was briefly checked at Acorn Hall by Lord Joseph Smallwood and Lord Peter Piper, though the latter was killed in the fighting, forcing Smallwood to withdraw to his castle. 3 days later, the Riverlords regrouped under the command of a hedge knight, Sir Harry Penny, and offered battle once more. The Westermen again prevailed, but the engagement was bitterly costly. Sir Adrian and Sir Harry slew one another in single combat during the fighting. With Adrian dead, overall command of the Westermen passed to the elderly and wounded Lord Humphrey Lefford. The Westermen would carry on their march to join Criston Cole and the Prince Regent Aemond at Harrenhal. It was imperative the forces loyal to the Blacks stop the Westermen before they could join with their allies and create one large army with the mighty Vhagar at its back. Best make an end of these lions before the dragons come. Roderick Dustin to the Blacks at the Fishfeed on the banks of the God's Eye. Fire and blood, the dying and the dragons. Rhaenyra triumphant. When the Westermen reached the western shore of the God's Eye, Humphrey Lefford found himself confronted by a far larger force. From the north came Lord Roderick Dustin with 2,000 winter wolves, all mounted, while from another direction advanced Lord Forrest Frey with 200 knights and 600 infantrymen. To compound the threat further, Red Rob Rivers of Raventree Hall arrived with 300 archers. Before Lefford could adjust, a second black host appeared from the south. Sir Peter Longleaf had arrived with the survivors from the earlier fighting at the Red Fort and Acorn Hall, possibly the remnants of the Pipers and the Vances, along with Lords Biggleston, Chambers, and Perrin. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Humphrey avoided committing to either front, instead withdrawing to a defensive position with his back to the lakeshore. Seeking relief, he dispatched ravens to Harrenhal, requesting aid from Prince Aemon. All were intercepted or shot down by Red Rob. The following day, the black host was further reinforced by Sir Garibald Grey, Lord John Charlton, and the young Lord Benjicott Blackwood. Though the Westermen were now encircled, the situation remained perilous for both sides. Lefford had drawn his men into a tight formation behind ranks of disciplined pikemen, making a frontal assault costly, yet waiting was equally dangerous. If they delayed too long, Aemon's army would notice their silence, march to intervene and bring Vhagar into the battle. In this instance, the Black Loyalists would surely be decimated by the Dragonfire. Faced with no safe option, Lord Dustin and the other Black commanders resolved to strike immediately and storm the Lannister position before opportunity slipped away. At dawn the following morning, the Westermen were struck. The Winter Wolves led the assault, charging repeatedly against the Lannister spearmen. 5 times their cavalry crashed into the disciplined ranks, and 5 times they were driven back with heavy losses. Yet the attack from 3 sides steadily forced the Lannister host to retreat towards the God's Eye itself. Fighting dissolved into chaos along the lakeshore. Hundreds died amidst the reeds, while many more drowned attempting to flee the encirclement. What followed became a slaughter rather than a battle, remembered thereafter as the Fishfeed, the bloodiest land engagement of the entire war. The Blacks paid dearly for their victory. Lords Frey, Biggleston and Charlton were among the slain, and 2/3 of the northern levies were killed or maimed. The Greens lost their commander, Lord Humphrey Lefford, along with Lords Swift and Rain. And knights such as Clarence Crakehall and Emory Hill, the young Benjicott Blackwood is said to have wept at the sight of the fallen. The Lannister host was utterly destroyed, with the western defences stripped bare. Lord Dalton Greyjoy, the Lord Reaper of Pike, seized the opportunity to ally with Rhaenyra, unleashing the Ironborn upon the western coast. Lannisport was sacked, though Casterly Rock itself held. Even so, the Blacks in the Riverlands emerged grievously weakened despite their triumph. In the aftermath, Prince Aemon and Sir Criston Cole abandoned Harrenhal. Aemon turned to a brutal campaign of raids from the sky upon Vhagar, while Cole rode south in search of Lord Ormond Hightower. With Sir Criston Cole, Prince Aemon Targaryen, and Vhagar absent from King's Landing, Daemon Targaryen joined Rhaenyra above the capital upon Caraxes, while she herself took to the skies on Syrax. At the same time, Lord Corlys Velaryon's fleets entered Blackwater Bay, completing the encirclement of the city. Inside King's Landing, Grand Maester Orwell attempted to send ravens calling for aid, but he was seized before any messages could be dispatched. Riders bearing warnings were likewise arrested at the gates, and the 7 captains in charge of the city's entrances were either killed or taken prisoner by goldcloaks still loyal to Daemon, who had once been their commander and had given them their gold cloaks. With the gates open from within, the city yielded swiftly to the approach of the Velaryon forces. King's Landing fell in less than an afternoon. Lord Larys Strong escaped the city with King Aegon, Princess Jaehaera, and Prince Maelor. He sent Jaehaera away under the protection of Sir Willis Fell towards Storm's End, and Prince Maelor, Aegon's heir, with Sir Rickard Thorne towards the host of Lord Ormond Hightower. Those who remained of the Green Council surrendered. Rhaenyra took possession of the Iron Throne. Dowager Queen Alicent was spared, but Sir Otto Hightower was executed, along with Lord Jasper Wilde. Sir Tywin Lannister was subject to torture in hopes of recovering the gold he'd hidden from the treasury. Prince Joffrey and Aegon the Younger were summoned to the capital, while Viserys was still believed dead. After hearing that Rhaenyra had planned further campaigns against Aemon and Daeron and intended no mercy in victory, Queen Alicent, now captive, pleaded for peace. Rhaenyra rejected her offer, declaring Alicent's sons had forfeited any claim when they stole her birthright and caused the deaths of her own children. If I strike my banners, do you promise us our lives? I made my promise to the dead. I told them I would build a set for them out of traitors' bones. I don't have near enough bones yet, so if there's to be battle here, many of your own will die as well. That's why we come. Winter's here. Time for us to go. No better way to die than with a sword in hand. As you will it, we can begin here. The 4 of us, 1 of me against 3 of you. Will that be enough to make a fight of it? I want 3 more. I'll have no songs about how brave you died, Kingmaker. There's tens of thousands of dead on your account. Sir Criston Cole, Garibald Grey, Roderick Dustin and Pate of Longleaf. At the Butcher's Ball, Fire and Blood, the Dying of the Dragons, Rhaenyra triumphant. Criston Cole and Prince Aemond disagreed on how to respond to the losses of the Lakeshore and the fall of King's Landing, ultimately resulting in their division and Criston Cole's march south towards Lord Ormond Hightower's army, which was marching through the Reach to retake King's Landing. Cole marched out of Harrenhal with 3,600 men, having lost about 400 due to enemy raids, disease and desertion. They travelled south along the western shore of the God's Eye, but the Riverlords practiced a scorched earth tactic, burning their own forests and villages. The Blacks used guerrilla warfare against the Greens, and day by day, more of Cole's host deserted or joined the Blacks. On one occasion, they came across a grisly display of festering corpses, the bodies of men who had fallen at the Fishfeed. Later, at the village of the Crossed Elms, Criston's forces were attacked by Blacks disguised as corpses, losing 12 men before realising the ruse. As Sir Criston Cole marched towards the Blackwater Rush, he led the remnants of the Greens into a trap at a stony ridge south of the God's Eye. There they found themselves outnumbered, roughly 2 to 1 by combined Northern and Riverland forces. Criston called for a parley with Sir Garibald Grey, Sir Pate of Longleaf and Roderick Dustin, Lord of Barrington. Though he offered surrender, 3 Black commanders refused his terms. Known as a formidable warrior, and both handed the King and Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Criston prepared to face them in single combat, 3v1. Before steel could be drawn, however, he was brought down by arrows loosed by Red Rob Rivers and 2 of his longbowmen. With Criston Cole dead, Lord Dustin raised the call to attack. The Black Vanguard, made up with the remainder of the Winter Wolves and Riverlords, charged at once. The Green forces collapsed instantly under the assault, and hundreds were cut down in the ensuing rout as they attempted to flee the ridge. After the battle, Sir Garibald Grey remarked, "Today was butchery, not a battle." Upon hearing Garibald's observation, many began calling the slaughter the Butcher's Ball. Sir Criston Cole's death in the Butcher's Ball marked the high point of Rhaenyra Targaryen's fortunes. However, Prince Aemon Targaryen and King Aegon II still remained to carry on the Green's cause. In the aftermath of the victory on the Honeywine, Lord Ormond Hightower and Prince Daeron Targaryen consolidated their strength in the Reach, compelling houses Oakhart, Rowan and the Lords of the Shield Islands to submit to King Aegon. While Queen Rhaenyra had seized King's Landing, Ormond advanced on Longtable, the seat of House Merryweather. His approach sent waves of refugees fleeing ahead of the army towards the market town of Bitterbridge, spreading panic across the Reach. Amidst the chaos, Sir Rickard Thornton, who was attempting to escort Prince Maelor and his dragon egg to the safety of Ormond's host, was caught in the middle. They never reached the army. At Bitterbridge, they were both brutally killed in the turmoil, and the prince's dragon egg was later recovered and sent to Ormond by Lady Caswell as way of apology. Facing the might of the advancing army, Lady Merryweather ultimately chose to surrender Longtable. Ormond took the castle's provisions and wealth, but spared the house itself, showing restraint even as the war around him grew even more bitter and brutal. Lady Caswell too hoped that Lord Hightower would be merciful when he arrived at Bitterbridge. Prince Daeron, however, refused, and used the dragon flame at his Sirion to burn the town. Daeron began with the inn at the Hog's Head, but the flames spread to other inns, storehouses and homes. Hundreds of wounded died within Bitterbridge's sept, and townspeople were cut down by Ormond's soldiers, or forced into the Mander to drown. Begging mercy for her children, Lady Caswell yielded her castle to the Green Host and hanged herself from the gatehouse. Ormond then indeed spared her sons and daughter, sending them as prisoners to Old Town, but ordered the entire castle's remaining garrison put to the sword. The small folk fleeing the slaughter of Bitterbridge moved towards the market town of Tumbleton. Seldom has any town or city in the history of the Seven Kingdoms been subject to such a long or as cruel or as savage as a sack as Tumbleton after the treasons. The writings of Archmaester Gildane on Tumbleton, Fire and Blood, The Dying of the Dragons, Rhaenyra Triumphant. Sir Ulfwhite and Hugh Hammer, the Dragon Seeds, were dispatched with their dragons Vermithor and Silverwing to take the town of Tumbleton, the seat of House Footley, and the last major stronghold still held for Rhaenyra between King's Landing and the advancing army of Lord Ormond Hightower. If Tumbleton fell, then the path to King's Landing would be open to the Hightowers. The town's defenders were a sizable but mixed force, drawn from across the Reach and Riverlands. Many came from House Caswell of Bitterbridge and House Merryweather of Longtable, joined by others from further south. Fresh from victory at the Butcher's Ball, arrived Sir Garibald Grey, Sir Pate of Longleaf, Red Rob Rivers, and the Winter Wolves led by Lord Roderick Dustin. Additional men came from the Blackwater Rush, including Mosslander of Yore, Sir Garrick Hall, Sir Merrill the Bold, Sir Roger Crone, and Lord Owen Borney. Estimates of their strength vary, but most accounts place it at around 9,000 men. Despite this, the Greens held a clear numerical advantage. Worse still for the defenders, their position was undermined from within. Some Green soldiers had slipped into the town, disguised as fleeing smallfolk, and key figures among the defenders, Roger Crone and Lord Owen Borney, were secretly loyal to King Aegon II, setting the stage for betrayal. At the opening of the battle, Sir Garibald Grey led 6,000 black troops against the advancing forces of Lord Ormond Hightower. The Hightower archers inflicted heavy losses, forcing Garibald's men to fall back, though they were covered by the bowmen of Red Rob. As the retreat threatened to turn into a rout, Lord Roderick Dustin led the Winter Wolves out through a postern gate and charged the enemy. Though vastly outnumbered, the Northmen cut their way through the Green ranks and reached the heart of the host. In this chaos, Roderick slew Lord Ormond Hightower and his cousin, Sir Brendan Hightower, before finally succumbing to his own devastating wounds. The arrival of Prince Daeron Targaryen on Tessarion did not immediately dishearten the defenders, as the dragon was smaller than both Vermithor and Silverwing. With the Hightower commanders dead, many believed victory would soon be at hand. That hope proved disastrously misplaced. In a sudden and shocking turn, the two betrayers, Hugh Hammer and Ulfwhite, turned their dragons against Tumbleton itself. Vermithor and Silverwing unleashing fire upon the town, setting it ablaze. Buildings burned and thousands perished, either consumed by flame or drowned in the Mander while trying to escape. Outside the walls, Pate of Longleaf was thrown from his horse and trampled, while Garibald Grey was slain by dragonfire from Tessarion. Within the town, treachery spread. Sir Roger Crone's men opened the gates to the Greens, and Lord Owen Borney betrayed Sir Merrill the Bold inside the castle. Lord Footley's men surrendered, only to be bound and executed. What followed the fall of Tumbleton was not a victory, but descended into chaos. With Lord Ormond Hightower dead, the Green Army was left without a clear commander, and discipline collapsed entirely. The town was subjected to a brutal and prolonged sack. Soldiers looted homes and shops indiscriminately, torturing wealthy inhabitants to uncover hidden wealth. Violence spread unchecked. Men and boys were slaughtered, and women of all ages assaulted, with no regard spared even for scepters or silent sisters. The atrocities reached such extremes that even infants were killed in the madness. Amidst the disorder, Sir John Roxton slew Lord Footley and claimed Lady Charis Footley as his prize, while Sir Ulfwhite reportedly indulged in repeated acts of excess and cruelty. Daeron Targaryen attempted to restore order, urging Sir Hobbit Hightower to take command, but Hobbit proved incapable. Rivalries among the Green Lords only worsened the situation, culminating in Lord Unwin Peake murdering Owen Borney during a council. News of the catastrophe spread rapidly, and in King's Landing, Dowager Queen Alicent Hightower reportedly greeted the defeat of Rhaenyra's forces with grim satisfaction, declaring that the Blacks would now reap what they had sown. Fear gripped the small folk as rumours of Tumbleton's fate reached the city. Many attempted to flee, terrified that the same horrors would soon befall King's Landing, but Rhaenyra ordered the gold cloaks to seal the gates, trapping the population within. Around the same time as the First Battle of Tumbleton, a merchant cog named Nysaria was blown off course by a storm and put in at Dragonstone for repair. As the crew passed the Dragon Mount, they glimpsed two dragons fighting in the skies. The sight stirred local fishermen, who sailed out the next morning to investigate. What they found were burned and shattered remains of a wild dragon, Grey Ghost. Sir Robert Quince, Castellan of Dragonstone, concluded that the cannibal, another wild dragon, had been the culprit. In truth, this was a harsh misjudgment. King Aegon II Targaryen, having been smuggled out of King's Landing in disguise by Larys Strong, had secretly made his way to Dragonstone. There he was reunited with his dragon, Sunfire. It was Sunfire who killed Grey Ghost, not the cannibal. As Aegon recovered, both king and dragon began to regain their strength, while his agents quietly found support among the locals disaffected with Rhaenyra. Dragonstone, left poorly defended, soon fell with surprising ease. Sir Alfred Broome, resentful at being passed over as Castellan, turned against the defenders and slew Sir Robert Quince. Amidst the chaos, Lady Baela Targaryen, daughter of Prince Daemon and Laena Velaryon, escaped on her young dragon Moondancer. She did not get far. Sunfire rose to meet her in the skies. In the ensuing clash, Moondancer was burned and blinded, and the two dragons crashed into the ground, locked in combat. Sunfire ultimately killed the smaller dragon. Baela survived but was badly burned and taken captive, though the fight left him grievously injured. Aegon too broke both his legs in the struggle. The king now held Dragonstone, a major reversal in the war. You were a fool to come alone. Were I alone, you would not have come. Yet you are, and here am I. You have lived too long, uncle. On that much, we agree. Aemon One-Eye and Daemon Targaryen at Harrenhal. Fire and blood, the dying of the dragons. Rhaenyra triumphant. After Criston Cole and Aemon One-Eye had parted ways at Harrenhal, Aemon began a campaign of fire, burning the Riverlands. Daemon Targaryen and the Dragonseed Nettles had been hunting Aemon and Vhagar for weeks, using Maidenpool as their base. However, they were unable to find Aemond. Daemon would allow Nettles to flee Maidenpool with her dragon Sheepstealer, after Rhaenyra became paranoid with the loyalty of the Dragonseeds after the betrayal at Tumbleton by Ulf White and Hugh Hammer. She had ordered the death of Nettles and the other Dragonseeds. After helping Nettles flee, Daemon himself left Maidenpool, sending out a challenge to Aemon to face him. He waited for 13 days alone with his dragon at Harrenhal until Aemon stopped burning the Riverlands to come to face his uncle. Aemon arrived on the 14th day, accompanied by his pregnant lover, Alys Rivers. Aemon and Daemon talked briefly before mounting their dragons. Aemon passionately kissed Alys goodbye. Both men knew this fight, one long in the making, would likely go down in legend in the history of Westeros and have a huge impact on the outcome of the war no matter who was victorious. The duel was said to be a sight to see. The sun was setting as the two dragons took to the sky. The dragon's shrieks and roars could be heard from dozens of miles away. So bright was the dragonfire, the small folk feared the sky itself was aflame. Caraxes slammed into Vhagar, locking his jaws on Vhagar's neck. Both dragons were grappling as they descended from the sky. Caraxes' jaws continued to tighten around Vhagar's neck, even as Vhagar's teeth tore Caraxes' wing and its claws opened Caraxes' belly. Prince Daemon is then said to have leapt from his saddle on Caraxes to Vhagar, where he drove his blade Dark Sister through his nephew's empty eye socket, just as both dragons collided with the God's Eye below, sending up a gout of water so high it was said to be as tall as the King's Spire Tower of Harrenhal. Neither man could have survived. The loss of both Aemon and Daemon and their powerful dragons was a severe blow to both the Blacks and the Greens, and House Targaryen in general. Each side lost a capable warrior and commander, as well as a powerful dragon. Vhagar's corpse was found years later, with Prince Aemon's body still chained to her saddle, with Dark Sister through his eye. Vhagar's skull was brought to King's Landing and displayed on the walls of the throne room. Dark Sister was restored to House Targaryen as well. Caraxes lived just long enough to crawl from the God's Eye back to the shore, where he died near Harrenhal. Daemon's body was never found. Some tales claim he survived and later went to find his lover, Nettles, but most historians dismiss this, believing instead that Daemon's body was carried away by the currents or consumed by fish. Around the same time, across the realm, at the burned husk of Tumbleton, the betrayer dragonseeds Ulfwhite and Hugh Hammer showed little eagerness to aid Daeron Targaryen's march on King's Landing. Lord Unwin Peake urged delay until Lord Boros Baratheon could bring reinforcements, while Hobbit Hightower preferred withdrawal back to the Reach to secure provisions. In the meantime, the green host steadily dwindled, thinning by desertion and sickness. Over the last few weeks, Rhaenyra had lost control of King's Landing to mob rule, culminating in the death of her son and heir Joffrey Velaryon, the destruction of the Dragon Pit, and Rhaenyra being forced to flee her own city. Word of the unrest stirred younger lords, Sir John Roxton, Sir Roger Crone, and Lord Peake, chief amongst them, to press for an immediate advance. Yet Hobbit counselled restraint, and the two betrayers held firm in their position. Matters came to a head when Hugh Hammer declared himself king and set men upon Roger, prompting 13 loyalist lords, thereafter called the Caltrops, to conspire against the base-born dragon riders. Elsewhere, Sir Adam Velaryon, himself a dragon seed, condemned by Rhaenyra after the news of the two betrayers reached her, resolved to reclaim his honour by retaking Tumbleton from Ulf and Hugh. Fleeing King's Landing on Seasmoke, he is said to have sought the counsel of the Green Men upon the Isle of Faces. From there, Adam turned to the Riverlands, riding from castle to gather what strength remained. Survivors of past battles, greybeards, and boys scarcely grown. Bold, charming, and quick of speech, he won over many lords, who offered what aid they could. Some stirred by the sight of his dragon, others driven by fear of what a green victory might bring after the brutal sack of Tumbleton. Among those who answered the call was Benjicott Blackwood, the 12-year-old lord of Raventree Hall, Sabitha Frey, Lady of the Twins, newly widowed, and joined by her family of House Vypen, Lord Stanton Piper, and Joseph Smallwood, Lord Derek Darry, leading what remained of Vhagar's destruction of his seat, and Lord Lionel Dennings. Hugo Vance, now Lord of Wayfarer's Rest, arrived with 300 men and the merest sellswords of Black Trombo, veterans of the Butcher's Ball. Most significant of all, House Tully at last entered the war, its full strength unspent. The coming of Seasmoke and the fate of Tumbleton persuaded the hesitant Elmo Tully to abandon neutrality, despite the objections of his bedridden grandfather, Lord Grover. In all, Adam assembled a Riverlord host nearing 4,000 strong. The dragon was Seasmoke, his rider, Sir Adam Velaryon, determined to prove that not all bastards need be turncloaks. How better to do that than by retaking Tumbleton from the two betrayers, whose treason had stained him. The writings of Gildane on Adam Velaryon at Tumbleton, the Princess and the Queen. On the night the Caltrops chose to move against Ulf and Hugh, the Greens at Tumbleton were roused from sleep by the clash of arms. Though Adam Velaryon's 4,000 rivermen were fewer in number, they struck with the advantage of surprise. Columns of knights fell upon the town from the north and the west, while archers loosed their shafts in deadly volleys. Above it all, Seasmoke bathed the green camp beyond the walls in dragonfire. The flames spread to parts of Tumbleton that had endured the earlier sack. Ulfwhite slumbered through the chaos, unaware of the slaughter unfolding. Hugh Hammer hastened towards the stable, intent on mounting Vermithor, but was cut down before he could reach his dragon by John Roxton, one of the Caltrops. Prince Daeron the Daring perished in his camp west of town, though the manner of his death remains uncertain. South of Tumbleton, the Blacks sought to kill the sleeping Silverwing and Vermithor where they lay, but failed. Vermithor rose in a fury, slaying 200 knights before taking wing and turning his wrath upon all he found. In the chaos, Lord Stanton Piper and Lionel Dennings were consumed by Dragonflame. Elsewhere in the sky, Adam and Seasmoke were engaged in a swift struggle with Tessarion, Daeron's dragon. Catching sight of Vermithor's rampage, Adam turned to face the greater threat. Some, like Lord Benjicott Blackwood, later claimed Vermithor would have torn Seasmoke apart with ease, but Tessarion soon entered the fray, and the three dragons clashed in a savage melee. Vermithor ultimately slew Seasmoke, yet did not long survive the encounter, collapsing soon after. Gravely wounded, Tessarion failed thrice to take flight. At last, on Blackwood's command, his archers granted the dragon a merciful end. The Blacks carried the field at the Second Battle of Tumbleton, yet their triumph was far from complete. Though the Riverlords lost fewer than 100 men while cutting down more than 1,000 of Lord Hobbit Hightower's green host, they could not reclaim the town itself. The surviving Greens withdrew behind Tumbleton's walls and barred the gates. With no siege engines at hand, the Blacks were forced to abandon the field under the cover of night. Of the 4 dragons that had taken part, 3 lay dead, leaving only Silverwing alive. In the aftermath, the Cloudtrops pressed on with their designs against Ulf White, and both he and Hobbit Hightower soon perished after drinking poisoned wine. Command then passed to Lord Unwin Peak, but the once mighty host that had marched from Oldtown was already unravelling, plagued with desertion and lawless plundering. With little choice, Peak led what remained away from Tumbleton, bringing an end to the green threat against King's Landing. Despite the heavy loss of dragons, the battle stood as a clear victory for the Blacks in terms of bloodshed, their minimal losses against a far greater toll inflicted on their foe. Strategically as well, it proved decisive, for it shattered the Hightower army as they were driven back south, yet the outcome carried a bitter edge. Though Adam's sacrifice spared King's Landing from the advancing Greens, the city itself slipped from Black control amidst riots sparked by fear of their approach. Not long after the battle, Grover Tully died, and Sir Elmo briefly assumed the lordship of Riverrun. The largely intact Riverlord host, still numbering near on 4,000, regathered its strength, as Elmo continued to call banners, drawing further support from houses such as the Mallisters and the Brackens. The war would only have one more proper battle, but things would quieten down somewhat for a while before that, as both the Blacks and the Greens were left badly bloodied. After fleeing King's Landing, Rhaenyra was ultimately killed by Aegon when he surprised her on her return to Dragonstone, leaving the Blacks rudderless without a figurehead leader, and Aegon, the almost now undisputed king. Boros Baratheon would retake the capital, and Aegon would solidify his rule briefly after returning to King's Landing to quell the riots known as the Moon of Madness and return order to the capital. Yield, sir, the day is ours. I'd sooner dance in hell than wear your chains. Kermit Tully and Boros Baratheon. Fire and blood, the dying of the dragons. The short, sad reign of Aegon II. Though Rhaenyra Targaryen had fallen, the war did not end with her. Many still took up arms against King Aegon II. Lord Boros Baratheon, long hesitant to face dragons in the field, had last seized King's Landing during the Moon of the Three Kings, restoring the city to Aegon's rule. Earlier in the war, he had gathered a force of nearly 6,000 men at Storm's End. At Riverrun, Lord Elmo Tully had likewise assembled an army approaching 6,000 strong. Among those who rode with him was Lord Benjicott Blackwood, his fierce aunt, Black Ally, Lady Sabitha Frey, Lord Hugo Vance, Lord Jorah Mallister, Lord Ronald Darry, and Lord Humphrey Bracken. When Lord Elmo died during the march, command passed to his son, Kermit Tully. As the Rivermen advanced towards King's Landing, Boros resolved to meet them in open battle, determined to crush what remained of Rhaenyra's cause in the war's final days. Reinforcements swelled his ranks from the levies of Duskendale, Hayford, Rosby and Stokeworth, houses that had once declared for Rhaenyra but bent the knee after Aegon's victories and the taking of hostages. To those who were added 2,000 ill-armed men drawn from the streets and alleys of Fleabottom. Though the Baratheon army held the advantage in numbers and had yet to be bloodied, it lacked the hard-earned experience of its foes. Boros had deliberately kept his strength from decisive engagements throughout the war, avoiding the great battles that had ravaged the realm. The Rivermen, by contrast, were veterans of countless struggles, many having fought the war's opening days through the fiercest clashes in the Riverlands. The Blackwoods in particular had stood at the Battle of the Burning Mill, the Great Struggle by the Lake Shore, and the Second Battle of Tumbleton, their ranks tempered by years of relentless war. The two hosts met upon the King's Road, 2 days' march from King's Landing, where the road ran between a wooded stretch and a low hill. Days of rain had turned the ground to a thick mud beneath their feet. Disdainful of boys and women, said to lead the Rivermen, Lord Boros Baratheon advanced with confidence and led the charge himself as dusk began to fall. From their position upon the hill, Alysanne Blackwood's longbowmen shattered the momentum of the Stormlanders' cavalry charge. Those riders who did press on found their advance checked by the sucking mud, and what remained of their charge broke against the Rivermen's shield wall. The Baratheon infantry pushed hard and came close to breaking through, but the battle was turned when Benjicot Blackwood struck their flank from the cover of the forest. At the same time, the levies from Hayford, Rosby and Stokeworth held back from the fight, whilst the ragged men of Fleabottom fled outright. Most damning of all, the Knights of Duskendale turned their cloaks, falling upon the Stormlanders from the rear. Boros Baratheon is said to have fought fiercely amidst the chaos, cutting down many foes, among them Lord Roland Darry and Joram Alistair, yet he had already taken several wounds by the time he came face to face with Lord Kermit Tully. Refusing all calls to yield, the Lord of Storm's End met his end beneath Kermit's morning star, and with his fall, the battle was lost. The lads, Kermit Tully, his brother Oscar, Bloody Ben Blackwood, pressed on towards King's Landing, now scarcely more than a stone's throw away. Other forces gathered in support of Prince Aegon the Younger as well, most notably the host of Lord Cregan Stark marching south along the King's Road. The noose was certainly tightening, and the tidings grew ever more dire for King Aegon II. To those around him, the truth was now plain. His position was untenable, though the king himself would not see it that way. Amongst his councillors, Lord Corlys Velaryon in particular urged a final course: that Aegon yield, take the black, and spare what remained. The king refused. Instead, in a last act of defiance, he commanded that the ear of his nephew, Aegon the Younger, be cut off as a warning. Soon after, he was borne back to his chamber in a litter. Yet when the curtain was drawn aside, Aegon was found dead within, blood upon his lips, felled by poison. The king was dead and all the fighting now done. The struggle of the dance was still not at its end, as a peace between the Blacks and the Greens, a mutual agreement would need to be forged by Cregan Stark during the Hour of the Wolf.